And then I think the most important one, but the hardest one to do is think big, which is like you have to always be trying to scale up and scale out and think of how what you're doing could impact even more people.
Thank you, Eric, for your time today. Really appreciate it. Would you please tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Eric Stevens. I work at Amazon as a TPM, Technical Program Manager. I've been at Amazon now for 3 years and 3 months, more or less. I joined Amazon as a business intelligence engineer. I think you actually already have a video too talking about the whole BIE role. So I work pretty closely with Vishesh, who you talked to in that video.
Yeah.
So I've been a BIE for the last 3 years or so, and then in the last couple months, I've transitioned to this new TPM role. So it's been an interesting experience these last couple months learning about what exactly that role comprises and what's expected of me and how to do it well. Um, but before Amazon, I worked at Slalom Consulting for a year or so,
Mm.
doing consulting in the local Seattle area, mostly like business intelligence and analytics focused. And then before that, I worked at Tableau Software as a product consultant for 2-ish years. So what I did there was I learned Tableau software, basically Tableau Desktop, Tableau Server, and then I worked in pre-sales. So I helped customers understand how to use it and like worked with like demos, that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
that's a little bit about me. Yeah.
You came in as a BIE,
Mhm.
and then you moved into the technical program manager role.
Correct.
You know, so was that what thinking at the beginning when you first joined Amazon, or was that like your career goal, or was that something that you were kind of planning on doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. My career has been an interesting one because it seems like it's been a bunch of happy accidents, frankly. So I was a geology and econ major in school.
Oh
So
wow.
like I was moved to Seattle planning on like studying rocks. I think I've got my like honors project down there of
Okay.
geology stuff. So, it's all been pretty serendipitous. After college, I was given the opportunity to work for a professor doing developmental economics research through my college. So it was a lot of like meta analysis, so like analyses of analyses on different types of interventions you could do for developmental economics. And then from that, I had a friend who had also went to my college who recommended this job at Tableau for me, and that got me into this whole world of business intelligence. So it's kind of been like very serendipitous and like unplanned. So starting at Tableau, learning a lot about BI and the tools and the programs that we use there, and then actually applying that in the real world, and then going to a company like Amazon where we do it to the largest degree possible, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just been a natural progression. And for me, I think I was ready. I've done the BIE role long enough now that I know the ins and outs pretty well. So I wanted to kind of level up basically and start working from like the management perspective, defining vision, defining strategy, working on like execution, that kind of stuff. So not in
Gotcha.
plans to answer your question in short.
Geology.
Yeah,
Very different. Okay.
very different.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a very interesting perspective. Can you can you tell me about like how you got into the company Amazon?
Sure.
You said you worked at Sloan before, right before this. Were
Mhm.
you approached, or like were you, if you were applying, did you have a referral? And let's say like what was the interview process look like? And
Yeah.
maybe like how long did the whole process actually take?
Sure. I cold applied on Amazon's website, which
Oh
I think
wow.
is not the case for many folks, but I am a testament to the fact that it can work. I was working at Solemn and I was on a project that I was getting a little bit tired of and I was ready to try something new. So I was, Amazon in Seattle's got a very large presence. So, and I had some friends who already worked at Amazon. I didn't really know about the whole referral process then at that point. So I just cold applied on the website and it worked out. I picked a role that matched my skill set pretty well. It mentioned the skills that I had, the skills that I used. So a lot of SQL, a lot of Tableau, a lot of like taking vague requirements and turning them into like actionable metrics. And the first step in that process, obviously, is applying on the website. I had a call with a recruiter to kind of talk through like, hey, like, here's what the role is. Like, what are you looking for? Does this match your expectations? And then once that happened, we had a phone screen, two phone screens, I believe, one with the hiring manager and one with technical business intelligence engineer to check for tech skills.
Mm.
So like a SQL is usually what we test for with BIEs. So two phone screens, and then it was the on-site interview. So now during COVID time, it's very different. It's all done remote, and it can sometimes be over multiple days. But back when I applied, it was in person. And so if you were not in Seattle, they'd fly you in, and it's a full day of interviews. Basically, I think it was 5 or 6 interviews, and you're just talking nonstop, basically. And they're asking pretty tough questions. It's hard. They're like getting like, okay, go
Yeah.
whiteboard the solution, go
Yeah.
show me your best dashboard. Why do you think it's the best dashboard you created? Like, what's innovative
Um,
about it? Go ahead, sorry.
yeah. So kind of interesting on like the whiteboard thing. So what's a be like what did the technical interview look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. The phone screen that I first did is pretty emblematic now of what we do for technical phone screens, where we'll both log in and like write code together, basically, or write SQL together.
Okay.
Or we'll talk about like an example data modeling project, or we'll talk about hypothetically how you would approach some sort of an analytical situation. Back then, the way it looked like when we were whiteboarding is someone would give you, like, for example, 2 tables, and they'd say, okay, like write out the SQL, and you just like would write it on the whiteboard, right? Because you can't run it,
Oh,
you can't test it. And it's more conceptual. They're not checking for like, did you put the right brackets here? It's more like,
gotcha.
do you understand how to manipulate this data, basically?
Gotcha. Okay, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
So let's maybe talk about your role a little bit.
sure.
Tell me about what you do as a technical program manager. I know technical, you probably work with tech, but yeah, like what do you do, and like tell me a little bit about your day to day as well.
Totally. When people say PM, it can mean a lot of different things. PM can be referring to project, it can be referring to product, it can be referring to program. And in this case, TPM is referring to program. So projects have a start and end date. Programs are never ending, basically. So it's always about continuous
Mm,
improvement. It's about, a flow that never stops. You're always
mhm,
delivering. And product obviously is something that you'd be launching at the end of the day. So similar to a
mhm.
project, it's a little bit more time bound. Program has no start and end, basically. So with that, we're constantly working on improving our program. In our case, our program is a BI program, which is kind of why I, as a BI engineer, transitioned to this TPM role, is because I know the BI space very well, and now it's about managing this program. So our program is focused on delivering business intelligence and analytics and reporting to the entire North America consumer org of Amazon. So that means Canada, US, Mexico, and then all the product families on Amazon.com. So computer parts, Calvin Klein, clothes, whatever it
Yep.
is, we're going to be doing the analytics for. Um, so our what I do is basically ensure that the rollout of these new dashboards and this new stuff that we're doing is going to meet everyone's needs. I work on engagement. I work on end user training. I work on building solutions, or like understanding the requirements when things are a little bit confusing or hairy. As you can imagine, there are a lot of people who want very different things, and they all think that their things are very important. So it's my job to come in and say, like, objectively, your thing is less important than this thing. So we got to work on this thing
Gotcha.
first. Additionally, like understanding like the seasonality too. So like during Q4,
Uh-huh.
working during like Black Friday or
Yep.
Prime Day, understanding the reporting that goes into that and supporting.
Do you also work with like I guess staffing or like program management for how many people, how many resources you need, how many people you need? I mean, obviously, what you just described is like, based on what we have, these
Mhm.
are the priorities and like these are like what we can work on. But
Yeah,
on the other side, like, do you also kind of plan ahead with how many people we need, how many, like those kind of thing as well?
absolutely. Yeah, our program is a little bit strange in that it is both a common resource and also it is not a common resource. And what I mean by that is that people have funded headcount within our program, but
Hmm.
additionally, our program supports a wide swath of people who have not funded headcount. So basically,
Gotcha.
we're having to play this guessing game of like, how can we allocate people towards the things that they've been, the headcount that they've been established for, versus how can we make sure that for the greater good, we can raise
Hmm.
the bar for like all the reporting that's there. So as far as you're talking about like allocation, we have like a certain number of headcount. Amazon has two main operational phases each year called OP1 and OP2, where we go through the planning of like, what are we trying to execute in the next 6 months? What are we trying to build? Like, what are the resources we need to build that? And so through that process, we generally try and establish like a baseline of like headcount um, based off of the projects that we're trying to build. And
Hmm.
then it's all about executing once we get to that point in time. So usually you don't get what you ask for, as is the case with most things in life.
Yeah.
But you try and make it work, and you
Yep.
try and allocate people accordingly. So a lot of it comes down to seeing the projects that we have in our pipeline. We intake work through like a ticketing system. People do it in
Yep.
totally different ways, but through that ticketing system, we can then see like what are the big projects, what are the small projects, what's a high
Hmm.
priority, what's a low priority, and then prioritize based off of that and just kind of work through.
So you mentioned that you were a BIE before coming into a technical program manager.
Mhm.
Um, was there a learning curve when you first, did that shift or change?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I would still say that I'm not a very good technical program manager. Like I'm still learning stuff every single day.
Sure.
Um, and it's been one of the wonderful things about working at Amazon is that there's a very healthy community for a lot of job positions, but especially for this position. So there are
Mm,
internal conferences, there's internal resources called like TPM Con conference, TPM Samurai, all about focusing on like executing
yeah.
within their role. And I had a meeting with this very senior TPM a couple of days ago who was telling me about how to keep growing in this role, and he had a lot of really good nuggets of advice. Um, but the one I was wanted to say is that basically everything you can think of has already been built before, and it's been built in a really good way. So don't try and like reinvent the wheel here. Like if you're trying to send out a launch announcement, reach out to folks who've done this before and say, hey, does anyone have any like wonderful templates they've used for launch announcements, or does anyone have any like wonderful wikis that they've created? And you can take that and you can use that as your basis, like kind of copy their work a little bit,
Yep.
while still giving credit, obviously.
Sure.
And so that's been an interesting learning curve for me, is I've been trying to recreate a lot of stuff from scratch, when in fact a lot of these problems have been solved by really smart people ahead of me. So I should just kind of copy that work and work on the things that are specific to me on my program.
Gotcha. No, that makes total sense. Um, just one caveat that Amazon, we do have wikis, we do have launch announcements. Might be new to other people.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes. Launch
no.
announcements, when we launch a new item, we send out an announcement typically to let people know that it exists. And then Wiki
Yep.
is like our internal
Wiki.
Wikipedia. It's basically
Yeah.
exactly like
Yeah.
user generated connection of all
Yep.
the resources together. Yeah, thank you.
What do you like most, and maybe what do you like least about your role?
Ooh. What I like most is I get called into the most high priority and pressing things of a specific time. So, for example, we're working on like multiple high value, high import projects. I get called in when there's like a roadblock or something that needs to be fixed or worked through, and it kind of requires a little bit more like troubleshooting and thinking about the strategy of these things. So, what I like about my role is it's less about the pure execution now, which I've done a lot of, and I know how to do it. It's more about these higher level decisions and how we should strategically approach,
Mhm.
excuse me, the execution of them. So I really enjoy that about my job. I get pulled into like a ton of really cool and interesting projects. The thing that I don't like about my job is that I'm always pulled into these projects, and so these longer term things that I
Yeah.
want to work on end up having to take either a back seat, or it's just my day gets chopped up into multiple pieces. So I try and
Yeah.
plan like, here's 2 hours of deep work time where I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to build out this thing that I've been needing to create.
Yep.
And these escalations will come up and sometimes derail that, basically.
Yeah.
So an important skill I think that I need to learn, and I think is important for everyone at Amazon, is time management and just understanding how to work effectively and how to like time box yourself so that you hold yourself accountable towards like the goals that you created at the beginning of the day or the beginning of your quarter or whatever it is, and make sure that you can execute on those while still being like flexible enough to deal with those day-to-day escalations.
Can't agree more. I think this will be my last question.
Cool.
Advice for those who want to become a technical program manager without having that experience.
Yeah, it's a good question. The most important thing about becoming a TPM is what I've learned is called like force multiplying, basically. So automating yourself out of a process and ensuring that the value that you add to any process has a large multiplier effect to it. So what I mean by that is like I'm not manually going in there and like editing a specific document and saving it. I create a process that allows other people's work, or through automation and technology, is able to scale that up to a much larger
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's what I'd say is the largest focus that I think a successful TPM has. So anytime you can get yourself in a situation where you have a problem and you can automate yourself out of that problem, or automate it so that problem solves itself if you can, that that's going to be the best way to get that TPM experience, or that experience that you can point to when you want to be hired as a TPM.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's very important. Amazon specific TPM, I would say always leadership principles tend to be the guiding light, right, of
Yep.
how any hiring decision is made. But for those who are within like the TPM role, I think that delivering results obviously is very important. You need to be able to like concretely match a timeline and be able to deliver on that timeline. It's really
Yeah.
important for any type of PM role. Earning trust, obviously, with your end users, your stakeholders, like making sure that they know that you're running the program to their satisfaction, to what they need, to their inputs. And then I think the most important one, but the hardest one to do, is think big, which is like you have to always be trying to scale up and scale out, and think of how what you're doing could impact even more people. And this is easier to do in some places than others. I mean, before I started at Amazon, it was really hard to think of the ways that I could do that, because the scope of my position, or the scope of what I was working on, was pretty narrow. Like it was very well
Yeah.
defined. So getting yourself in situations where you can kind of either expand that scope or work on these higher breadth projects, where you can actually deliver on them well and automate them, that's always going to be a really helpful thing to point to try and get into a TPM position, and to get there eventually.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And yeah, I think those were all my questions today. Thank you so much, Eric, for your time. It's
Yeah,
been
thank you.
really
Really appreciate it, John.
delightful. Yeah.
Yeah, happy to chat.